everyone. Thank you for coming again. This is actually the third time we've had John Rush with us, and tonight's topic is going to be the phenomenon of the ancient aliens. Well, it's more than just a TV series in the United States. It's also, there are books dealing with it, and John's gonna, I'm actually gonna interview John, and John will answer a lot of the questions about how this phenomenon started. So, John, do you want to read your introduction, or we just start?
Let me kind of explain to the audience my interpretation, or at least my general interpretation of the ancient alien hunters. I don't know if space aliens have visited planet. I have no idea. Nobody else does either. Statistically, I think it would be unrealistic to assume that advanced beings do not exist in the universe, but have they visited Earth? One problem I have with the issue is simply this. A group of people calling themselves the ancient alien hunters have so contaminated the search for UFOs and the possibility of extraterrestrial contact with a lot of silliness and really gross misinterpretation. They've inadvertently aided in any cover-up established by the U.S. government and others. In short, they've lost credibility in the eyes of many former believers. This is a very interesting YouTube presentation, Ancient Aliens Debunked. It's fairly long, but it goes through all the issues that they have been presenting. It's interesting that their fourth or fifth season has been kind of held up a little bit, I think, because of the criticism that they have.
So how did this belief in ancient aliens visiting Earth all get started?
Well, there's several things we can look at. I think certainly the science fiction writers, H.G. Wells and so on, had a hand in this. Humans, as you know, are very, very creative. This creativity certainly goes in a couple of directions. We can create silly things, and we can create lots of wonderful technology and ideologies and so on. There's a common theme in myths around the world of mystical beings who came to us from the heavens bearing gifts. Perhaps bearing gifts or prophecy, as we encounter in the New and Old Testaments, if you will. The major conclusions drawn from these current interpretations of these similar myths is that they represent real events, except these entities are actually space aliens and from other worlds and not gods. So that's what we see here. We see a transplanting, if you will, of aliens and a removal of the gods from the myths. Now, these similarities that we see around the cultures in the world, they may represent real natural events. But what were these events? Certainly we can look to some very extensive volcanic activity around 13 or 12,000 BCE. We have global warming going on 9,500 BCE, and somewhere around 5,600 BC we encounter the Noah's Ark story. This is because of rising waters in the ocean and areas of the earth that are prone to being torn away by the water and water flowing into valleys and drowning lots and lots of people. We have intense meteor showers occurring 3200 BC and 2300 BCE. The 3200 BCE event of meteors and so on is tied to the Aztec calendar, and that was the event we just went through, December 21st, 2012. So they were aware that there was some sort of event that ended in, well, the destruction of cultures all over the world that occurred 3200 BC. And again, that is what that December 21st, 2012 date is geared to. We also see in the world, and Darwin had a lot to do with this, a movement away from belief in gods and demons and And we end up with ancient aliens serving as a substitute for our creative need, I guess, to believe in fantastic things. When you look at the ancient alien hunters as figureheads, we can see a new cult developing here, a new Christian cult. It has all the elements. We have a clash between good and evil, and at some point a savior will show up and save the world from these evil grays, if you will. So we've got two types of aliens out there. We've got the grays, who are the evil ones, and then we have the greens, who are supposed to be the good guys, who come down here and give us wonderful information because we're dumb and stupid and we can't come up with our own technology and so on. The goal here, I think, is to remove the concept of God from the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic dogma and replace the gods with ancient aliens. And this fits certainly better with our ideologies about our cosmology and how we got to be in this place. And of course, there's other reasons that we can see this, the ancient alien hunters so prominent in the media. And that is economic reasons. There's a lot of money to be made here. People are gullible. People want to believe in fantastic things, and people like Van Daniken and others have set up a situation where they have reported these fantastic things, and people have a tendency to believe it.
So how do we then go from ancient myth to ancient aliens?
Well, we certainly do have a nervous system hardwired for language. I think this has been shown or proven to be the case since the 1950s. This hardwiring for language and symbolizing, we can then collect information and construct metaphors that represent these new interpretations of life experiences, if you will. The problem here with all this language and hardwiring for it and so on, we don't have a nonsense filter. In other words, we can very easily abandon logic and critical thinking in favor of fantasy, which has two sides to it. On the one hand, we can get into a lot of trouble with the nonsense that we create. But in terms of fantasy, all things are possible, and that's our creative side as well. So that nonsense filter, although we don't have one, allows us to be quite creative. Now, the other thing is that people want to believe in fantastic things, particularly when people are under stress. If you look at the churches in the United States, they're full. And the reason for that is the current economic situation, and of course all the division and stress that's been created by this president of ours. In 2008, as an example here, the Catholic Church was praying to God to save the automobile industry. And this is really no different than asking Uncle Fred, an ancestor that's been dead for thousands of years perhaps, to go back and tell the animals to come back for another meal. It's the same idea, going to the deities and asking for help. But again, without fantasy and false connections, we lose our creative side. Now, the early writings, the cuneiform and so on, all of this belongs to belief systems and metaphorical references separating us by about 5,000 years. Now, in a sense, these early writings from Mesopotamia, they do represent history in a way, with a twist. In other words, these are these people's interpretations of their experiences, but what were they really experiencing? Some experiences were gleaned from the horror and beauty that they saw around them, and some of these experiences were gleaned from dream states, illnesses, and so on. But the major factor here that led to the gods and so on, at least in my interpretation and the interpretation of others, is the use of mind-altered substances. Remember, storytelling and stories belong to an elite experience. It's the gifted, the shamans, the priests, the artists, who set the stage for the construction of these myths. And what we see with the ancient alien hunters is a total misunderstanding of myths and what they refer to. And again, we have people like Zechariah Stitchin and his Earth Chronicles. Anyone wants to read all of that, there's about 8 volumes of it. And Sitchin reads these stories as real, tangible experiences. And because gods and demons don't exist, they must have been instead space aliens or beings from other planets. We also have the Mesopotamian writings that speak of beings who come to Earth and interbreed with humans. Gilgamesh, the story of Gilgamesh, if you're familiar with that, his mother was a goddess, Simpson, and that makes him a part human, part god, and so on and so forth. In Mesopotamia, we have the Anunnaki, and the ancient alien hunters believe this is a space alien, one of the Greys, if you will. This is based on a god by the name of Anu, who was a storm god, not a very nice person, if you will. And Anu represents at least one class of these space aliens called the Greys. And of course, then we have the Greens, who are supposedly the good guys. Now, the good guys, for example, Ah is an example of a good alien. He's a subterranean freshwater god who imparts knowledge to humans. Ah becomes Onis about 1,000 years later, and Onis actually is a reference to John the Baptist. So we can see that these myths, through time, I mean, they change as the situations change. But again, they're not references to aliens. They're references to these people's experiences of the world, and certainly their own ignorance as to how the world works. John the Baptist, by the way, is the one who brings to humanity the teacher of righteousness, and the teacher of righteousness is the Anomina muscaria mushroom. Again, we've talked about that before. In the Old Testament, we have the Nephilim. These are the fallen angels, and also a reference to the interbreeding between these fallen angels, if you will, and modern humans. And we can see that they probably borrowed a lot of these ideas, or at least Sitchin and some of them borrowed a lot of their ideas from the other literature coming out of the Hindu epics and so on and so forth. In ancient Egypt, we have a pharaoh, and of course pharaohs in ancient Egypt were gods on earth. And the ancient alien hunters claim that Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, who is Moses in the Bible, they claim that he's an alien through a misinterpretation of the art that we encounter. Akhenaten's head is deformed, as is Nefertiti's and their children, and they look at this as these individuals as being gods. But that's a lack of understanding as to what the art really stood for and what it really meant. So what does all this mean? Do we really take it literally, this idea of aliens coming down here? I don't think so. I think the stories that reference gods, if you will, these are mythical charters, and what they do is they give people political propaganda to justify their rule. That's essentially what they are. We also have ways in looking at these stories, a way of explaining demonic behavior of humans, the personalities, if you will, of humans. Recall that the Nephilim, if you will, were not very nice, and they were engaging in a lot of naughty behavior, and the deity sends down the flood to kill them all off. I mean, this is really tough love, isn't it, in an extreme sense. Well, let's look at these cataclysmic events. See, the ancient alien hunters believed these cataclysmic events were caused by aliens fighting in the heavens, you see, with atom bombs and all that kind of stuff. But we now know from some very detailed literature from respectable people that we have a number of cataclysmic events caused by natural processes, meteors hitting the Earth and solar flares and so on. And these things go back a long, long season. As I mentioned, we can trace these back 12,000 BC, all the way up to a fairly recent time. We have 5600 BCE. The waters of the earth had arisen something like 360 feet because of global warming. And the portals that held back the Bosphorus that ran into the Black Sea, these broke away. And the Black Sea used to be a freshwater lake. And living on the edges of this lake were thousands and thousands of people who'd come down from the highlands because it was kind of cold there into the area of the Black Sea. And as all that water flooded in there, it drowned thousands and thousands of people. And this would have stayed in memory. And this is probably the Noah story. We also have the Straits of Hormuz leading into the Persian Gulf. That broke away. And that area in there is probably the reference to the Garden of Eden in the Bible. And thousands of people would have drowned from that. And again, that would have stayed in the memory. As I mentioned, the fifth era of the Aztec tradition just ended December 21st, 2012, and that is a reference to the cataclysmic event that happened 3200 BCE. And cultures just went out of existence. And a lot of these cultures that went out of existence, they left very little evidence. And of course, we end up believing that civilization begins about 4000 BC, somewhere around in there. But it must go back much, much further than that. This 4000 BCE issue is quite interesting because really it refers to Archbishop Usher's belief that the world was created 4004 BCE. And the archaeologists are stuck with this date. And they believe civilization, that's when civilization arose about 4000 BCE. But we know civilization's been around since at least 10,000 BCE. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is a good example of this. It has all the earmarks of civilization, megalithic architecture, a calendar, writing systems, and so on and so forth. And this was all destroyed. We're not quite sure exactly what happened there, but that was destroyed. So this 4000 BCE date of the development of civilization that the archaeologists give you, that's based on the biblical idea that the world was created 4004 BCE. The archaeologists have been very slow to include some of this ancient information, if you will, of civilizations that go back much further than 4000 BCE.
This is kind of. I have a question. It's kind of getting off of the ancient aliens thing, but I think we can get back to that. What kind of impact do you think it will make? I mean, like you said, the whole archaeologist community is very slow. When I was in elementary school, junior high school, university, everything that I learned said that before 4000, 5000 BC, it was just hunter-gatherers, right? So what kind of change do you think it will actually make when people start to accept that civilization is at least 12,000 years old?
Well, what it does is it takes us back to realize that our ancient ancestors were not stupid, that information is gleaned from living and then gets lost and then has to be reinvented. And we have to make allowances for the possibility of these really ancient civilizations. Now, we get the ancient alien hunters to kind of get back to them. They've got this belief that, you know, we humans go back millions of years and so on and so forth. There's no evidence to support that, but they do have some artifacts that have been found that really do need to be explained as to why they are in certain places and can be dated to certain things. What the impact of this will be, I don't know. Hopefully we'll smarten up and realize that our ancient ancestors were intelligent and that they didn't rely on aliens coming from outer space. Actually, that's really an insult to humanity to suggest that we needed help from outer space in order to develop culture. Ultimately, I think we're going to start seeing that we're a lot smarter than we have given ourselves credit for. And civilization may go back even further than 12,000. We've got information that suggests that things were really happening around 30,000 years ago with the event of Cro-Magnon man. We see a different type of consciousness developing about 30,000 years ago. Keep in mind that all along we can see, if we go back, say 1.7 million years ago, we see a different consciousness developing, and we can see the evidence of that in the Acheulean hand axes and the technology. And then wham, all of a sudden about 100,000 years ago or 80,000 years ago, we start to see jewelry being made, and the interest in what people think of you when you decorate yourself, and inscribing lines on clay and things. And then about 50,000 years ago, humans leave Africa. And where do they go? They go right over to Australia. Then 40,000 years ago, there's another group that leaves Africa. This group that leaves Africa, 40,000 and 50,000 years ago, these groups, we're starting to see a creative explosion with these people, a different way of thinking about the world, and everything takes off after that. We start to see in the caves in France and Spain all that artwork, which is probably a library, because information is being lost. We're beginning to see with Cro-Magnon people living up into their 60s, which means you have not only children and parents, but grandparents and probably great-grandparents as libraries to save information. So our ancestors were smart, and we survived because we were smart, not because ancient aliens came down here and gave us all this information. So I think as time goes on here, as we realize this, I think the major thing is that, you know, our ancestors were smart. They didn't need ancient aliens in order to survive.
So, getting back to, maybe let's focus in on the story concocted by Zacharias Sitchin, and you can talk about all the specifics in there.
Oh, okay. Can you give me 1 second? I'm going to let a cat out. Hold on.
Okay, no problem.
Meow.
Yeah, I've got about 10 cats in here that like to sleep on me at night. Anyway, okay, Sitchin. His ideas are this, and it comes from a distortion of information, his interpretation of things. By looking at the Sumerian literature, his belief is that ancient aliens came down here a long, long time ago. It would have had to have been upwards of 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 years ago, and they either genetically altered Neanderthal or Homo erectus. Both of these are close relatives of ours. We could interbreed with them and produce viable offspring, so I guess they're us in a way. But anyway, Sitchin said we genetically engineered them to create modern humans. Now, the reason for doing this is that these ancient aliens needed slaves to work in gold mines, which is absolutely ridiculous. If these people could travel, you know, trillions of miles to get to here, they wouldn't need slaves to work in gold mines. They'd have technology. We have the technology. We don't need slaves to work in gold mines. We have the technology to go down there with big machines and drag out all this, all these rocks and process. So they wouldn't need this. Not only to think about this, you create slaves to work in a gold mine. Now you're going to have to feed them. You're going to have to take care of their medical issues. You're going to have to deal with their conflicts and so on. And no intelligent alien would ever come down here and do something as silly as that. So that's one of his ideas. The other thing is, why are they mining for gold? Well, the belief is that this planet from which these aliens come from uses some sort of gold flakes in its atmosphere to protect it from ultraviolet radiation or whatever, and so they need all this gold. And so they come to planet Earth because planet Earth is the only planet in the whole solar system, in the whole universe, that has gold on it, apparently, according to them, which is absolutely dumb and stupid. So here we have a story of aliens coming down here, genetically altering either Erectus or Neanderthal to produce modern humans, to work in slaves, to get gold, to protect their planet. This is silly. What they look at in terms of mining probably had to do with mining flint, not gold. We do know that Erectus must have mined flint. Flint is found in connection with chalk deposits. You don't find flint anywhere, everywhere rather. It's found in connection with chalk deposits, and you have to know where they are to get it, and so on and so forth. So when they see this type of thing, they have totally misread what it really means. So this is the storyline. And people have a tendency to believe this silly stuff. At any rate, that's what Sitchin believes. Again, this is problematical at best. We know from looking at the remains of Homo erectus, we know that it regionally developed into Neanderthal in Europe, modern humans in Africa, and was evolving into something that was looking like a Neanderthal in China. So we know the progression here from an evolutionary standpoint, and there's no evidence of any tampering by aliens with any of this. Now, I teach physical anthropology and genetics, and by looking at the data, we can discount Sitchin's his ideas. But again, a lot of people are gullible and they want to believe this stuff.
So there are a lot of, in the Ancient Aliens series, sort of each episode has a different topic. Recently there have been sort of topics about geniuses or about tools or art. You know, there's like, this art must have been, you know, this art depicts aliens, or this person must have been an alien because they were a genius or something like that. Can you talk about those kinds of specific episodes?
Yeah, this is another insult to humanity. The belief is that these ancient aliens, the good ones, though, not the evil ones, but the good ones created genius in certain people and apparently still do this on occasion in order to have new ideas come up amongst the human groups. There's no evidence of anything like this. Genius is just there. We can track genius back to those caves, those shaman who painted in those caves. They were genius people. Look at the art; it's all naturalistically rendered, and so a genius has been with us all along. And we don't have to suggest that ancient aliens came down here and did this, but that's what one of the more recent episodes of Ancient Alien Hunters talked about this. Einstein was genetically altered, and so on and so forth. I mean, certainly there's no way of proving this, but it's actually pretty silly, if you will, to suggest that something like that was going on. Our ancient ancestors, as far as they're concerned, the ancient alien hunters are concerned, were dumb and stupid, and only through intervention of these extraterrestrials did we learn to make pottery and tools and supersonic aircraft and whatnot. This recent belief, for example, we have this Area 51. I know people that worked at Area 51. My sister worked at Area 51 and so on and so forth in Nevada. And this idea that aliens came down here and gave us this new technology for stealth fighters and all that kind of stuff that's come up. What is not being emphasized is now we use computers to come up with all this stuff. You put all this information in, the computer tells you what to build. And so it's a geometrical progression, if you will, as we've discovered things about jet engines and aerodynamics and so on. We put this information together, put it into a computer. You're trying to do something, so you press a button, and the computer puts it together. You don't have to suggest ancient aliens are coming down here and giving us new technology. Again, it's pretty silly to even suggest such a... It's an insult to humanity.
Speaking of quote-unquote ancient technology, I think you described this before, but I can't remember your description of it. Do you know the quote-unquote Dendera light bulbs?
Oh, yeah.
Can you describe, I mean, there are a few different places, I'm not sure if it's only Dendera, but there are what people look at these, they're hieroglyphs?
Yes.
People look at the hieroglyphs and they say, oh, this is a light bulb, right?
It's Lotus.
Well,
It's a lotus plant.
It's a lotus with a snake, but it also has to do with air and water, right? Can you describe the whole thing?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what it stands for, but the hieroglyphs that surround the images do not speak to aliens whatsoever, and they do not speak to anything creating light. These were simply, light in a metaphorical sense, yes, because the lotus was often used as an admixture to their wine. And you see in the hieroglyphs, for example, people partying, and on top of their head they've got a cone-shaped thing that's red. And you can see that they're brewing wine and lotus together to get stoned. That's really what it is. That cone on the top of the head represents being in a different psychological state. But these are not light bulbs. These are lotuses, if you will, and they're representing, if you will, probably the idea that when you consume these types of things, you get high, and you're going to think differently. This is the reference to these things, not to light bulbs. These people never had light bulbs.
Okay. Well, we're just about at a half an hour, so if you want to wrap up and give some final thoughts, then we can open it up to questions.
Okay. I think what we've run into here with the ancient alien hunters is a couple of things. First of all, trying to explain the myths, looking at them as perhaps more historical than metaphorical by the ancient alien hunters. There's also, we have to bring Darwin into this to recognize that the Bible and the myths that were part of Western culture have been brought into doubt. And we need to look to other places for where people have encountered these mystical beings, if you will. And I think the best place to look at this is the substances used to commune with the other side. Now, the ancient alien hunters have not spoken to this at all. I have challenged them in terms of these different substances that were used in ritual process by the priests, by the shamans, if you will, to commune with the other side. And there's just a whole list of these things, and they show up in the art. Now, if the ancient alien hunters could explain away the mushrooms, the cannabis, the henbane, the opium, the datura, on and on, the psilocybin, all of these plants and fungi show up in the art all the way from India to San Francisco. We see this idea of consuming these substances in the Paleolithic, the Upper Paleolithic, in those cave paintings. The source for trough prayer is an excellent example of someone who is on some sort of substance, probably psilocybin mushrooms. So the best place to look for gods and ancient aliens would be in the use of these substances, if you will, to commune with God. And all these traditions used them. They were used in India, in the Hindu tradition, and they're still used to this day. In Buddhism, cannabis is sort of the favorite, if you will. They don't talk about this. In other words, it isn't something that you're going to find in print by the people who put together these stories. But the modern researcher looking at the Hindu texts, for example, can see the use of these substances. There were images of these substances in the temples and so on. So I think that's probably a better explanation for the gods and the aliens, and that is the use of these substances. However, in our society, we have demonized these substances. The Church, the Catholic Church, has demonized them because they wanted exclusivity in their use. And so they demonize them. You don't want them falling into secular hands to be used recreationally. So they've gone out of their way to, through guilt and public shame and whatever, to play down these substances. And I think the ancient alien hunters may, in fact, be going along with the line of the Catholic Church. They want to believe that it's aliens that they're encountering rather than the use of mind-altering substances. Let me show you something here. This is a new book that's coming out. I don't know if you can see this. I have a new book that's coming out. This will be out supposedly July 9th. I'm not sure what stage it's in right now. I think it's in formatting right now. It's called Entheogens and the Development of Culture. What I did was to round up some of the most famous people on the planet who have studied and researched the use of these substances in religious traditions. We have some very famous people, Carl Ruck and Gaston Guzman, right on, Jan Irving and so on, right on down the line. And Michael Winkelmann, for example. And they point out that these substances have been around for thousands and thousands of years. We can see them in the art, and if they weren't important, they wouldn't be shown in the art over and over and over again. And we can see that these substances were extremely important in decision-making and the development of culture. That's all been left out of the formula. Winkelmann, for example, is a biological psychologist, and he has looked at the human liver and compared it to that of a chimpanzee. And what we know is that we have liver enzymes that suggest, highly suggest, or really indicate that we've been in contact with these mind-altering substances for millions of years. Chimpanzees have not. And the suggestion is that these substances have helped enhance our consciousness, language, right on down the line. For example, let me give you an example of this. Chimpanzees will consume alcohol, they will consume opium, but they stay away from things like LSD and dimethyltryptamine and psilocybin. They stay away from these substances. We're not quite sure why. I think it's because they can't express to each other what they're experiencing when they take the substances. They're sort of left with a frightening experience that they can't explain. And so they stay away from these things. Humans, on the other hand, the only critter on the planet that I'm aware of that enjoys frightening him or herself. You go to the movies in your relatively safe environment. But in a movie theater, we can go there and frighten ourselves, but then we can talk about it. We can watch the, Chainsaw Massacre and then go home and talk about it. Chimpanzees cannot do that. And so it's suggesting here that with the advent of language, which must go back a couple million years, at least the proto-language, these substances became even more important because we could talk about our experiences. And our livers and our enzymes and our livers tell us that we've been in contact with these things for a long, long time. Homo erectus leaves Africa about 1.7 million years ago and goes right up to the province of Georgia between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Traveling around like that, leaving Africa, they're going to have to search for new foods. And they would have tried just about anything. And in the process of doing this, they would have bumped into different mind-altering substances. Some of them killed them. But they then learned that some of these substances help to expel worms or deal with stomach aches, and certainly would alter their consciousness. And out of this, we develop medicine. We also develop our ideas of supernatural beings and so on and so forth. To me, looking at all the data that's available, it's very difficult to push away the idea that these substances were not important. These substances were extremely important, but we don't want to think that we needed drugs in order to develop culture. And so we've demonized them, we've pushed them aside. Again, the Catholic Church demands only one celestial truth, as does Judaism, does Islam. And so these substances were demonized. These substances were just as important in Islam as they were in Christianity and Judaism. Just because in the mid, Muhammad which means praiseworthy. There wasn't a Muhammad, there was a general perhaps, who was called praiseworthy, and then the term Muhammad gets stuck to him. But these people, although alcohol was banned, probably because they didn't want people going into battle dehydrated, it does not mean that they weren't using other substances. And they certainly were using cannabis. They were using terpene-type compounds that come from plants that were fermented in milk. There's some very interesting discussions of this in this new book.
Okay, so what would you say are our, and this is just the final thing before we open it up for questions, what would you say are our choices when we want to think about the ancient, quote-unquote, ancient aliens? What are our choices?
Well, the major thing here is that we do need a new myth. We do not have a myth that guides us in the world today. The myths have been fractured, they've been brought into doubt, and we need a new myth to organize around. And this is one of the big problems in the world. If you don't have a myth that's organized in the culture goes into disrepair and confusion and goes out of existence. The ancient alien hunters, I think, in their own way, are attempting to establish a new myth, something that would direct us to get into outer space. But I think we need to really come to the idea that the Earth is going to be destroyed. There's no doubt about this. It could be sooner or later. We just don't know. And we need to establish a myth around this to get off the planet. And if we don't do this, we're just going to experience more and more discord in the world. Just look around and you can see what's happened. People are making some very, very bad decisions. And thermodynamics comes in here. When you're making bad decisions, you lose energy. And if you make a lot of bad decisions, then the culture goes out of existence. And we're looking at this in the United States today. A lot of bad decisions are being made, and I'm really concerned. So the major thing, I think, here is the development of a new myth that we can live by, and we don't have one.